What happens when imagination crosses a line that even animation cannot defend? The 1980s gave birth to animated worlds so bold they terrified studios and confused censors. These were films meant for wonder, yet accused of madness. Some were cut to pieces, others vanished overnight. Tonight we reopen the reels critics tried to bury forever. This is 13 animated movies of the 80s that went too far. Number 13, Fire and Ice, 1983. It looked like a fantasy dream, painted in motion, yet Fire and Ice burned too bright for its time. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and inspired by the art of Frank Frazetta, it combined rotoscope realism with a primal story of survival. The tale followed Larn, a young warrior battling the evil Ice Lord Necron, who sought to freeze the world. Audiences expecting another heroic cartoon were instead struck by savage imagery, brutal fights, and dark mysticism. Critics claimed it glorified barbarism and was too intense for animation. Conservative groups called for restrictions after seeing scenes of warriors impaled and villages destroyed. The Motion Picture Association forced several edits toning down flames and blood from key sequences. Behind the scenes, Bakshi clashed with distributors who demanded a softer marketing campaign. They feared parental outrage after the controversy of his earlier work, Heavy Traffic. When the film finally released, it struggled at the box office but found worshippers on VHS, where the uncut version quietly resurfaced. Decades later, Fire and Ice is remembered as both savage and sacred proof that animation could be visceral, raw, and adult without apology. It became a blueprint for fantasy animators who dared to ignore the safety of fairy tales and walk into the fire instead. Number 12, Watership Down, 1982 reissue. By the early 80s, a haunting British film returned to theaters and once again terrified new audiences. Watership Down, first released in the late 70s, found renewed life on home video in 1982. Parents believed they were renting a gentle story about rabbits. What they got was pure nightmare wrapped in watercolor. The story of Hazel and Fiver, fleeing human destruction, turned into a spiritual journey filled with death prophecy and bloodshed. Censors in several countries, including Canada and Australia, demanded content warnings after children were reportedly traumatized by scenes of rabbits being strangled and mutilated. Schools banned screenings, while TV networks refused to air it before midnight. The outrage only fueled curiosity. Viewers who grew older realized it was never meant for children, but for anyone who understood fear and loss. The animation's hand-painted beauty clashed with its tragic realism, creating one of the most dissonant experiences in animation history. Behind the scenes, distributors battled the BBFC over classification. British censors debated between U and PG, eventually compromising under pressure from moral watchdogs. Even so, it stayed controversial for decades, resurfacing in articles and news debates every Easter when it aired on television again. Watership Down endured as a quiet rebellion, proof that animated films could face mortality, not escape it. Its legacy whispers that innocence once lost can still find courage in darkness. Number 11, Rock and Rule, 1983, a futuristic rock opera from Canada. Rock and Rule tried to combine animation with adult rebellion. It told of a post-apocalyptic world where mutant animals form rock bands, and a sinister musician named Mock plans to summon a demon using sound waves. The concept was wild, the visuals electric, yet its chaos made studios panic. The film went through years of production nightmares under Nelvana Limited. Originally titled Drats, the project ballooned in budget as animators fought to blend rotoscoping psychedelic lighting and original music from Iggy Pop, Debbie Harry, and Lou Reed. MGM, the American distributor, hated the tone-demanding cuts to remove scenes with drug-like hallucinations and satanic symbolism. Executives forced voice redubs, removing slang, and rewriting the entire ending for U.S. audiences. The result confused critics who called it a fever dream without direction. The film quietly disappeared after limited release, but bootleg copies of the Canadian original began circulating on VHS and later online. Rock and Rule became a cult totem, a time capsule of 80s rebellion when animation dared to channel the same reckless energy as punk music. Every frame screams freedom, even if that freedom came at the cost of its own destruction. Its legacy lives not in theaters, but in the hearts of those who believe art must never obey. Number 10. The Plague Dogs, 1982. From the same creators who made Watership Down came a film even darker and more disturbing. The Plague Dogs told the story of two laboratory dogs who escaped from a cruel research facility only to be hunted across the English countryside. It was beautifully animated, yet unbearably bleak. Critics called it one of the most traumatic animated films ever made. The movie's premise seemed innocent enough at first. Rofe and Snitter, two dogs scarred by years of experiments, find freedom but also fear. Their desperate run through misty moors felt almost human. The tone, however, was unrelenting, filled with pain, confusion, and moral despair. When the dogs were falsely accused of carrying a deadly plague, panic spread through every human they met. It mirrored the paranoia of Cold War Britain, where fear was an everyday companion. Censors hated it. The BBFC demanded heavy cuts to scenes showing the animals drowning, bleeding, and suffering inside test tanks. In the United States, distributors hesitated to release it at all. When it finally arrived, it carried an R rating rare for animation. Parents who expected another Watership Down stormed theaters demanding refunds. Behind the scenes, directors Martin Rosen refused to compromise. He even produced two endings, one hopeless and one faintly merciful. Some versions removed key death scenes, while others were trimmed for TV airings in the late 80s. But the uncut version survived on imported tapes, becoming an underground treasure for animation purists. The Plague Dogs remains a haunting allegory about human cruelty masked as progress. It was too honest, too sorrowful, and far too real for the cheerful world of cartoons. Its message still lingers. Freedom is a beautiful lie when fear runs the laboratory. Number 9. Heavy Metal, 1981. Few films defined animated rebellion like Heavy Metal. Released in 1981, this anthology of futuristic tales was built on the DNA of rock music and magazine art. It was an explosion of violence, fantasy, and surreal sci-fi vignettes, all connected by the glowing green orb called the Loknar, the embodiment of ultimate evil. Each story was visual chaos, from space pilots battling mutant hordes to warriors slicing through alien wastelands. The soundtrack thundered with Black Sabbath Blue, Oyster Cult, and Sammy Hagar. But beneath the sound and spectacle lay themes of death, corruption, and obsession. It was like watching an illustrated nightmare come alive. Censors across the globe erupted. The Motion Picture Association wrestled with the film's graphic tone, forcing Columbia Pictures to issue strict adult-only screenings. Several countries banned it outright, including Singapore and South Africa. Even U.S. theaters received warnings advising parental discretion. Behind the scenes, production nearly collapsed when artists rebelled against management, claiming deadlines were impossible and the tone inconsistent. Some segments were toned down, others reanimated entirely. The biggest battle came with the music rights. Because each song belonged to a different label, the film vanished from home video for nearly 2 decades. When it returned in the late 90s through a restored DVD release, fans finally saw the uncut glory that had terrified censors. Heavy Metal is now revered as a legend of animated anarchy, a storm of color and sound that refused to obey moral gravity. It reminded the world that animation can rock harder than any live-action film ever could. Number 8. When the Wind Blows, 1986. No animation dared to confront the horror of nuclear war quite like this one. When the Wind Blows, adapted from Raymond Briggs's illustrated novel, followed an elderly British couple, Jim and Hilda, as they try to survive after a nuclear bomb devastates their country. It began as gentle domestic comedy, but ended in silence and despair. The hand-drawn style made it deceptively charming, yet every frame hid tragedy. The couple's optimism, their faith in government leaflets, and their naive belief that help would come soon were all painfully real reflections of Cold War fear. As fallout descends and sickness grows, their world literally fades to white. Audiences left theaters in stunned silence, many unable to speak. The controversy came fast. Broadcasters refused to air it, fearing psychological harm to younger viewers. British networks demanded edits removing the most disturbing radiation scenes. The soundtrack, composed by Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, only deepened its mood of doom and hopelessness. Behind the scenes, animators worked with real nuclear physicists to accurately depict fallout exposure, a first for any animated film. That accuracy became its curse. Teachers protested its inclusion in classrooms, while political figures claimed it promoted anti-government sentiment. It was banned from several school boards across the UK and parts of Australia. Over time, however, when The Wind Blows found redemption, critics now hail it as one of the most powerful anti-war films ever created. Its haunting blend of innocence and apocalypse proved that animation could confront humanity's greatest fear with devastating sincerity. The wind has long stopped blowing, yet its echo still chills the heart. Number 7. American Pop, 1981. Few animated films have ever attempted the ambition of American Pop, a sweeping chronicle of 4 generations of musicians struggling through the changing face of American history. Directed by Ralph Bakshi, it used rotoscope animation to trace the story from Russian immigrants escaping war to a rebellious rock star in the age of electric guitars. The film was both brilliant and bruised. It mixed archival photos with psychedelic colors to portray the cost of chasing fame in a country that eats its dreamers alive. Every sequence bled with passion, yet critics called it too realistic for animation and too artistic for mainstream audiences. Censors and studios clashed over its tone and imagery. Some distributors in conservative regions demanded cuts to remove references to war crime and cultural exploitation. Others objected to the portrayal of soldiers using narcotics in wartime or music producers exploiting young artists. Bakshi refused to surrender. He claimed he was telling the truth about the music industry's soul and America's obsession with fame. Behind the scenes, chaos followed. The animation team struggled with deadlines as Bakshi demanded constant reshoots for the rotoscope performers. Columbia Pictures nearly abandoned the project midway through. When it finally released in 1981, the film polarized audiences. Some hailed it as genius, while others labeled it a fever dream, too heavy for the genre. American Pop faded quietly, but later found resurrection on home video. Modern critics now call it a lost masterpiece, a rare animated epic that captures both the beauty and tragedy of the American dream. It reminds viewers that every melody carries a price and sometimes art bleeds to be heard. Number 6. The Secret of NIMH, 1982. Before Don Bluth became a household name, he took a terrifying gamble. The Secret of NIMH began as a children's book adaptation, yet became one of the darkest animated features ever produced. It told the story of Mrs. Brisby, a timid field mouse who must save her family from destruction while uncovering the secrets of a mysterious laboratory. The visuals were hauntingly beautiful, glowing with shadows and candlelight. Beneath the fantasy, however, lay a story about genetic mutation, mind control, and scientific cruelty. Early screenings left the parents uneasy. Critics praised the art, but warned that it might scar younger audiences. Several nations, including Finland and Japan, initially rated it for adults only. Fox executives panicked after focus groups reacted with tears rather than applause. They demanded softer advertising, yet Bluth refused to remove scenes showing animal suffering and psychic experiments. The controversy grew when religious groups protested its occult imagery, the glowing amulet and visions of ancient power. Behind the curtain, production nearly collapsed. Bluth and his team of ex-Disney animators mortgaged their homes to finish the film after leaving the corporate system they believed had grown too safe. Despite these struggles, The Secret of NIMH earned critical acclaim, though modest box office numbers. Its unflinching tone later inspired darker storytelling in animation through the rest of the decade. The legacy of NIMH stands as proof that bravery in art is not measured by comfort, but by conviction. Its whispers of fear and courage still echo, reminding us that animation can illuminate truth even when that truth is terrifying. Number 5. Akira, 1988. When Akira exploded onto screens, it changed animation forever. Directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, it was Japan's thunderclap heard around the world. The film plunged audiences into a futuristic Tokyo, rebuilt from ashes of nuclear disaster. It followed Kaneda and Tetsuo, two friends caught in a storm of psychic power, government conspiracy, and unstoppable destruction. For Western viewers, this was unlike anything seen before. The detail, The scale, the violence, the philosophical depth were overwhelming. Critics marveled at its hand-drawn precision, yet governments trembled. Censors in the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe hesitated to release it uncensored. Scenes of body horror and political corruption clashed with the perception that animation was for children. Japanese studios fought back. Otomo refused all edits, claiming that the chaos was part of the message that power without control breeds ruin. When American distributors finally released it, they cut entire sequences and dubbed it, poorly reducing its meaning. Fans rebelled, hunting for imports of the uncut edition. Behind the scenes, production costs soared beyond all expectation, making it one of the most expensive animated films of its time. Hundreds of artists worked frame by frame to create its epic cityscape. Many collapsed under the relentless schedule. Yet, when it premiered, it stunned the world and birthed a generation of cyberpunk creators. Akira became a cult scripture. It taught filmmakers that animation could be dystopian, political, and tragic all at once. Decades later, it still feels prophetic, warning humanity about power, technology, and control. It went too far, but perhaps that was its destiny to go beyond every line drawn before it. Number 4. Felidae, 1989. At first glance, Felidae seemed like an ordinary animated mystery about cats. But what unspooled was something no one expected. Based on the German novel by Akira Pirinci, the film followed Francis, a curious house cat who moves into a new neighborhood, only to uncover a string of brutal feline murders. Beneath its sleek animation and noir style lurked one of the most disturbing animated thrillers ever made. The story unfolded like a psychological horror wrapped in fur and moonlight. Francis's investigation leads him through decaying mansions, abandoned laboratories, and cult gatherings of cats who worship a dead leader. The imagery was drenched in violence, dismembered bodies, and disturbing religious symbolism. When it premiered, European audiences were stunned, while international distributors recoiled. Many assumed it was an adult film masquerading as a cartoon. German broadcasters refused to air it on television without heavy cuts. British and American companies backed away altogether, calling it too graphic for release. The film's mix of philosophy, evolution, and murder was unlike anything the animation industry had dared before. Even the production team received hate mail, accusing them of corrupting the medium. Behind the scenes, director Michael Schock battled both censors and financiers. Animators worked in secret to preserve scenes of nightmare visions, while studio lawyers demanded alterations. When it finally reached theaters, the film's marketing was confusing. Some posters hinted at Disney-style charm, while others emphasized its adult themes, leading to backlash from unsuspecting families. Over time, Felidae developed an underground following. Collectors sought out rare uncut VHS tapes from Germany. Critics later praised its intelligence and emotional depth, arguing it was never about shock, but about confronting moral decay. Today it stands as a warning that animation can explore the same darkness as live action, maybe even more deeply, because viewers never expect it. Felidae crossed a forbidden line and refused to apologize. Number 3. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988. Grave of the Fireflies was not banned for violence or scandal, but for truth. Studio Ghibli's heartbreaking war drama told the story of two siblings, Seda and Setsuko, struggling to survive after the bombing of Kobe during World War II. Audiences entered expecting hope and left devastated beyond words. Many critics declared it too painful to show to children, yet too pure to ignore. Director Isao Takahata based it on a semi-autobiographical short story by Akiyuki Nosaka, who lost his sister in the war. The film's animation was soft and painterly, yet every moment cut like a knife. Scenes of hunger, disease, and despair mirrored the tragedy of an entire generation. The most haunting sequence, where the siblings share candy as the world burns around them, caused walkouts in several screenings. Censors in Japan debated its educational value, fearing it might reopen national wounds. Some schools refused to show it, claiming it painted a hopeless picture of wartime Japan. International distributors hesitated, calling it emotionally destructive. Even Studio Ghibli separated it from their main catalog, for years treating it as a standalone art piece rather than the family entertainment. Behind the scenes, animators cried during production, unable to draw certain scenes without breaking down. Composer Michio Mamiya's score blended innocence and sorrow, creating an unbearable contrast. When released, it earned universal acclaim but limited audiences, yet over decades it became one of the most respected animated films ever made. Grave of the Fireflies remains an emotional abyss that forces humanity to confront its cruelty. It went too far only because truth always does. Every glowing firefly in that dark sky reminds us of the children war erased from history. Number 2. Pink Floyd. The Wall, 1982. When the British rock band Pink Floyd decided to turn their legendary album, The Wall, into a feature film, no one expected it to become one of the most surreal and censored animations in music history. Directed by Alan Parker with animated sequences by Gerald Scarfe, the film was part concert opera, part fever dream, and entirely too much for traditional audiences. It told the fragmented story of Pink, a rock star descending into madness after years of trauma, isolation, and fame. The animated sections visualized his inner psyche through monstrous teachers, fascist rallies, and grotesque transformations. These scenes stunned even hardcore fans. Censors called them obscene, violent, and psychologically harmful. The British Board of Film Classification debated for weeks whether to restrict its screening. Some scenes showing militaristic imagery and self-destruction were heavily edited for television broadcasts. American networks refused to air it for nearly a decade. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Director Alan Parker and the band fought constantly over creative control. Gerald Scarfe's animation sequences pushed boundaries of symbolism, showing education as slaughterhouses and youth as puppets of authority. Distributors panicked, fearing backlash from conservative audiences. Even in theaters, people walked out confused or disturbed. Despite the uproar, The Wall became an underground masterpiece. Musicians, filmmakers, and animators hailed it as proof that visual art could amplify emotion beyond logic. The combination of live action and animation created a haunting mirror of mental collapse and political commentary. It was banned in several countries, but bootleg copies spread like wildfire among students and rebels. Pink Floyd. The Wall did not just go too far, it redefined how far art could go before sanity snapped. It remains a cinematic hallucination, reminding us that sometimes madness is the only way to expose truth. Number 1. The Black Cauldron, 1985. No animated film from Disney's golden legacy caused more fear inside the studio than The Black Cauldron. It was the first Disney feature to earn a PG rating, and the one that almost destroyed the company's reputation. Based loosely on Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain novels, it aimed to bring epic fantasy to animation. But what emerged was a nightmare of darkness, death, and despair. The story followed Taran, a young pigkeeper who dreams of becoming a hero, but finds himself trapped in a war against the undead Horned King. The animation was lush, painted in glowing shadows and fiery reds, unlike anything Disney had done before. Yet early test audiences were horrified. Children screamed during sequences featuring skeletal soldiers rising from the cauldron. Parents stormed out of theaters demanding answers. Disney executives panicked. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had recently joined the studio, personally ordered massive edits. Nearly 12 minutes of footage were cut, including several terrifying scenes that showed disintegrating bodies and graphic transformations. The studio buried the deleted material, refusing to release it even decades later. Rumors claim those reels were destroyed completely. Behind the scenes, animators were divided. Some fought to preserve the darker tone, arguing that Disney needed to evolve. Others feared the company would never recover from the backlash. Production delays ballooned costs, making it the most expensive animated film of its time. When it finally hit theaters in 1985, it bombed catastrophically. Critics called it too grim for children and too childish for adults. But time has been kind to The Black Cauldron. As decades passed, it found redemption among collectors and dark fantasy fans who saw its ambition and courage. Today it stands as a cautionary monument to creativity, unbound, and corporate fear unleashed. It went too far only because it refused to play safe. For a brief moment, Disney faced its own darkness and realized that even fairy tales cast shadows. So, what happens when animation dares to grow teeth and stare into the abyss? The 1980s answered with stories too vivid, too painful, and too honest for their time. These films proved that animation is not just for laughter, but for truth. Which one haunted you the most? Let us know below and subscribe for more forbidden legends of cinema.